You can open it.
Okay, excellent. Okay, well, welcome everybody, and I'm sure many people will be coming. My name is Bill Dempster, and I've been a longtime contributor and collaborator with the Canadian Organization for Rare Disorders. So thank you, Durhan and Angela and the team for calling on me again to help direct traffic a bit on this webinar. We're going to have a hard stop at 1, and we want to actually get through quite a number of things on this webinar, and it's being called a foundational discussion, which is going a long way to contributing to what CORD and the rare disease community is preparing to put forward in front of not just Health Canada in terms of its ongoing consultation for drugs for rare diseases, but to really demonstrate to everyone across the country that CORD is ready to talk about Canada's rare disease strategy and what everyone can step up and do. And that includes provincial governments, healthcare leaders, clinicians, researchers, industry, and of course, patients, of whom there will be dozens on the line today. So this one will be a bit different from previous webinars in that we're hoping it will be less didactic. It'll be less from the front and just showing slides. You're going to be asked to respond to polls and really engage. So please use the chat function as much as possible. You can raise hands. We're going to have a few lead discussants, and you know who you are if you're out there. And we may be calling on a couple of you to respond to specific comments that you make in the chat group, or simply unmute yourself and put your hand up, and I'll notice. That's my job. But I think that's enough in terms of logistics, in terms of format, because I'm going to pass it over to Durhan. And Durhan, why don't you help situate where this webinar fits in the march toward both CORD's response to the Health Canada consultation, and more broadly, we're heading right into Rare Disease Day globally. So help situate us a bit, and then we'll get started.
Thank you very much. So why don't we just pop up the slide deck, and we'll use that. Thanks a lot, Bill. So those of you who have been with us before will know that this is actually our 8th webinar in this series toward a rare disease drug strategy. And what we wanted to do was come all the way back and say, look, let's make sure that we're laying a factual foundation. I don't know how many of you, hopefully some of you, have taken place in terms of some of the dedicated stakeholder meetings and or the town hall meetings. I have a chance to do one of each and was really appreciative in terms of the opportunity to really engage with other people on it, to really express opinions. If you have not signed up for a town hall, please do make sure that you do. It is in fact valuable, and it's really important that you've got your voice out there. So what we're calling is laying a factual foundation. And I put this with no, this is not meant to be pejorative, but I do think that it's important that we understand, you know, what's the basis, what's the premise by which we're actually doing a drugs for rare diseases strategy. And I know that some people have grated against what Health Canada or Canada has called high cost drugs for rare diseases. And I don't disagree that we are not just talking about, quote, high cost drugs. We're talking about the ability to make sure that we have the very best access for rare disease drugs that we can. And some of them aren't going to be that high cost. But so we thought we'd start with laying a factual foundation. And some of this actually takes a little challenge at some of the things that have been, you know, spoken about. It's in, you know, sort of in common parlance, as well as in some of the documents that have been used to set up either this strategy, you know, the consultations on this strategy, consultations on the PMPRB. So we thought we'd give a chance to talk about, you know, what's truth and what's not, you know, fact versus fiction. So as Bill says, we're going to ask you to engage with us. So this has been a series we've had this year, starting January 29th. We had, this one is laying the factual foundation. The 18th will be an evening session, and we're hoping that This will be an opportunity, especially for those in the patient groups who are really wanting to know, what are we thinking in terms of the discussion document? What are some of the key messages that we might be thinking about collectively? What are some of the concerns we've got? February 26th is Rare Disease Day, or as close as we can get to Rare Disease Day, and we will be having a celebration. We feel it's important to talk about the achievements that we've had, especially around the rare disease strategy. What's been happening in terms of rare diseases and that infrastructure that would allow us to make sure that we're going to have a successful pan-Canadian rare drug program. Next. So hoping that all of you will join us for Rare Disease Day Conference from draft to action plan. And this is very deliberate that we probably won't get to an action plan by the end of these 2 sessions, but we are very, very much pointing to the fact that we need more than a strategy. We need more than a program. We need to have a plan for action so that we can actually have implementation. So that will be on the 9th and 10th. So hopefully you've signed up for it. If you haven't, please do. So this is just the consultation strategy we've got. We are going to be working into August. I think there are some questions in terms of when everything needs to be rolled up, but we do know that Canada, at least, and Health Canada are hoping to have some form of a consolidated report by the end of March or into April that they will put out for consultation. So we're going to be working very much in parallel with them, have really appreciated the opportunity to coordinate and to collaborate with what Health Canada is doing. Next. So these are the town hall meetings. As we said, there's the link. You can Google it online as well. If you have not signed up for a town hall meeting, please do. It is so important that you are able to take part. There's one that is in French. All the others are bilingual, and they truly are bilingual. Great opportunity for really engaging, very open discussions, and really a great opportunity also to hear what others are saying, thinking. It's a very constructive atmosphere I found in both of the sessions that I've been in. Next. So, but we are very concerned that some of the premises that have been put forth in terms of why we need a rare disease drug strategy may in fact not be actually based in fact. So what we want to do with this session is we're going to give you a number of polls. We're going to ask you to respond to them and try to separate the fact from fiction. And then we're going to give you the answer to that poll, maybe a bit of the data that might substantiate why that answer is what it is. And then we're going to ask some of our commentators that we have pre-identified to maybe comment, or some of them that we may not have pre-identified to comment. And then we're having it very open for anybody to raise your hand and to share your point of view or to dispute with what we have said, or what dispute with what somebody else has said, or even dispute with our answers. We're calling it fact from fiction, but it may not necessarily be that. Okay, so, next slide there. Okay, ready? All right, so we're going to go into your first poll. So get ready. You all know how to do this, right? So we've been doing this all along. I think everybody is able to do this. This is a single choice, so you can only choose one answer here. The claim is that expensive drugs for rare diseases is the fastest growing market sector, and it's pushing the limits of affordability. This is why we need this rare drug strategy. Which of the following is a fact? More than 70% of spending identified as EDRD is for oncology drugs, for cancers, both rare and not rare. 2.5% of public drug spend is for non-oncology EDRDs. Less than 2% of private drug spend is for EDRDs, not including oncology. Total Canadian drug budget for expensive and non-expensive drugs was about 2% over the last year or so. None of the above, or all of the above? What do you think is fact, and what do you think is fiction? Choose the answer that you think is the best. We'll leave the poll up there, give people a chance. I know there's a lot of information on these options. So the claim is this is the largest, fastest growing market sector, but which one of these are true? That more than 70% is actually for oncology drugs, both rare and not rare, so not your run-of-the-mill rare disease drugs. 2.5% of public drug spend is for non-oncology EDRD. So if you take out all the others, you only end up with 2.5% that is for expensive drugs for rare diseases. Less than 2% of the private drug spend is for EDRDs. That does not include oncology. None of the above, all of the above. Everybody got their answers locked in? Maybe a second more. And we'll end the poll. Okay, so the winner by a hair's breadth, less than a third of the people said all of the above. A few people said more than 70%. The other closest was that 2.5% of the public drug spend is for non-oncology EDRD. So if you just looked at these, and less than 2%. Okay, so Ange, let's flip to the slides and let's sort of see if we can share some of the information here. So keep in mind kind of what this was, and let's actually look at what some of the actual facts are. So we'll close the poll. Okay, so we'll back up. Too fast, too fast, too fast. Way too fast.
So Angela, we should be on slide 11 from my from the deck I've seen.
Okay, this is the fact or fiction. Okay, so this comes from presentation based on the PMPRB research that Lindy Forte gave us last time presented. So what you see here is that, in fact, if we do strip out the oncology drugs, we get 2.5% that is basically for rare disease drugs itself. If you look over at the private spend, it's about 1.8% that is for strictly expensive drugs for rare diseases, so under 2% of that. And if you look at kind of the potential growth in that, the cumulative number, again, the huge portion is in the oncology drugs and not necessarily in the non-oncology drugs. And remembering well, for those of you who have maybe seen some of this before, much of that in terms of the non-oncology orphan drugs also includes indications that are not necessarily orphan indications, but are still accounted to the orphan drug just because it was approved as such. Bill, I'll turn it to you. Anything else you see in there that we should be focusing on?
Well, I actually like some of the nitty-gritty data that is presented, but actually never makes it into the headlines of these slides that are presented by the PMPRB. And that's the cumulative number of DRDs that are approved between 2012 and 2019. That's a threefold plus increase. Well, a threefold increase in terms of the total number of new medicines that have come to market in Canada in just 7 years. And if you just look at the top line, which is it looks like a very scary roller coaster like and flying off into the stratosphere. I'd like to see more review of the actual medicines that are coming to market and what they're doing for patients, as opposed to just focusing on the top line numbers. And then the second thing is, as you said, if we actually take out that yellow bar and look at it and actually forecast going forward 5 years, what does 2.5% turn into 5 years from now? And perhaps even more importantly, from the perspective of patients, what new therapies are they going to get access to for X% increase? So I think that's really important for the rare disease community to really understand, express, et cetera, because it's just looking at proportions and scary arrows like this only focused on price and percentages. It doesn't tell the whole story about the opportunity and the excitement that I think that rare disease patients deserve to have right now in terms of the innovations that are coming forward.
So let's flip one more slide up there just so you can see it. And the next slide. And that is a little bit what Bill was talking about. So it's about 2% now. The worst, not the worst case, but the possibility in 2024, 2025 is we could get to maybe 6%. And that would be if we continue at the same rate that we're looking at. And some of that is really maybe also misleading, because as we know, many of the new rare disease drugs that are coming in are for ultra rare conditions. Many of the major conditions have already been dealt with. So these are going to be very small numbers. The other thing to know is that some of these drugs that are coming in are going to be replacing older rare disease drugs. So again, that exponential function is not necessarily going to look as drastic. So why don't we turn it over to a number of our expert commentators and see if we can get a response back from them. Who do we want to pick on first, Bill?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'd be great if somebody from the industry could pipe in, because one thing that that's important with the numbers and the proportions is that they don't even include the rebates and the patient support programs and other I don't know, the real numbers that we're trying to get at. So, one thing.
Yeah, go ahead. We've got, let's give my, what about Carrie? Carrie volunteered to be on this and we haven't gotten a chance to get into it. Carrie, maybe you can introduce yourself and give us your reflection on what you see here. You're Sanofi, and Sanofi is one of our biggest rare disease companies. You got more coming in the pipeline. What are you thinking?
Hi, Durhan. Thanks first for your leadership, and Bill and Accord for having these. I think it's important to have meaningful, open dialogue that is inclusive so all people can come to the table. For me, when I think of cost, my concern is that we start with cost and we're not perhaps putting the patients and patient outcomes at the center of all that we do. And I think the dialogue needs to start there. I think, there's such a narrow focus on cost that we need to have. We can't talk about price without enough context around the focus of value on patient outcomes and the kind of healthcare system we want to have. I think some of these products create savings in the systems that are somewhat otherwise siloed. And I think to your point, Durhan, often they're replaced by older therapies and they're just a trade-in of a new therapy. So I hope that answers your question, but I think I'm remiss to talk about the price or cost without talking about the value and patient outcomes and post-marketing surveillance and those types of things. I think there's a larger conversation to be had. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I don't know who wants to weigh in on this question, but one of the knocks that I think that drugs for rare diseases gets is that the idea that there's a monopoly on one disease area and that's abused and that prices charged are excessive. But we have seen in the rare disease space significant competition, and the public drug plans get all of the manufacturers together and say, hey, can you do better? So once again, let's talk about the patient and the clinical benefit. We can't escape the questions around the economics and what can be done to actually create a competitive space for Canadians that will eventually lead to benefits for and access for Canadians. Because I think that we can get there, put the patients first, but then how does it actually work in reality, and what is the value that patients are getting? I don't know if anyone else wants to weigh in on that value question.
Let's see if we can get one of the patients. What does it mean to you to say that we're looking at a growth in terms of the spending on drugs for rare diseases, but hey, it's not runaway growth the way it might be painted? Anybody want to weigh in there?
Yeah, I think Maureen was Maureen, are you out there somewhere? You've been active on the on some of the other town halls and other things like that recently. And where's our friend in Ottawa?
I didn't see Maureen on
I don't think Maureen's joining till 12:30.
Yeah.
Okay.
A bit later. So who can give us a little bit of a thought in terms of this? Anybody from that? What are we thinking of? It's okay. I learned a long time ago to count to 8. Would somebody like to jump in here before I call on you? Okay, never mind. I'm going to call on you, Robin. What are you seeing here, Robin? What does this mean to you?
Okay. Well, I'm on a learning curve here, Durant, studying all this stuff. I think that I definitely agree that we need to consider value. How we get to value is the big issue, of course. And value isn't just curative or allowing you to manage the disease more, but it also has to do with quality of life and how we measure that. and how we get to that value, and that comes to clinical trials and accessibility and being able to, as treatments change and become more, I guess, precision medicines come forward, and personal medicines also introduce a whole issue of looking at value and having more work done by, I guess, the drug companies in terms of comparative diagnosis and looking at that. So from a clinical perspective, we need a lot more work to be done in that area too. And then, so I guess, yeah, looking at when we're approving drugs or looking at drugs, being able to be specific about how they're improving clinical outputs. And in addition to that, integrating quality into that, having effective ways of looking at what's important for patients in terms of broader quality of life with a drug. And finally, I guess, being able to get quicker access and getting value, looking at managed access, managed drugs, and looking at real world evidence, having that more as part of determining the value too. So I guess those are three things I would suggest, although those are just sort of off the cuff, I suppose. I don't know if that responds to what you're looking at, but there you go.
Those are brilliant. And really, as we say, number one, these drugs are often for conditions for which there isn't anything else. So don't just look at the number, as you say. Number two,
Right.
We're talking about, in some cases, the improvements in terms of quality of life that's hidden beneath that, behind that number, right? So a bit of what Carrie was saying as well. How do we make sure that we're able to? Let's flip to the next poll, if you don't mind, Ange. Okay, fact or fiction? Which of the following statements about budget impact is not true? So this is a not true question. That the annual budget impact of most orphan drugs is less than 50,000 in Europe and less than 35,000 in US. So for a single drug, the annual budget impact of a orphan drug is less than 50K or less than 35K. Second, the annual per patient cost of most rare disease drugs is $100,000 to $2 million in Canada. Number three, oncology, precision medicines, and orphan drug sales, this goes back to a bit what Robin was saying as well, are growing at the same rate, at about 11.8% over 5 years. So these are these highly targeted therapies. Rare disease drugs, precision drugs are growing at about the same rate. So we're seeing more and more of these coming in. And last one is the smaller number of patients treated by rare disease drugs, the higher the per patient cost. So when you've got a drug for a very small population, you will tend to have a higher cost. Which one of these is not true? So, okay, so you got to put on your inverse thinking hat. Which one is not true? Which one of these is not true? The most orphan drugs are somewhere under 50K and under 35K. On the other hand, annual costs are really between 100,000 to 2 million. Oncology, precision medicines, and orphan drug sales are growing at about the same rate, slightly under 12% over 5 years. And if you have a smaller number of patients, well, that means that you've got a higher price per drugs, which is not true. Okay, what do you think, Ange? Are we done? Let's sort of give the answers here. These are hard questions. They're not meant to be easy. Okay, so most people said that it was not true that the annual budget impact, that most drugs on an annual basis, orphan drugs, cost less than 50K in Europe and less than 35K in the USA, that the annual per patient cost of most rare disease drugs is between 100,000, oncology meds. Okay, let's flip to our slides and let's see what our slides tell us. Okay, so let's get rid of the poll here. The annual cost of the majority of orphan drugs in Europe is below 50,000, while the median annual cost of orphan drugs in the US is about 32,000. So actually, item 1 is correct. You know, we hear about the huge high cost drugs, but quite frankly, there are many, many orphan drugs that are actually not at all high costs. So it's important to recognize that, yes, we have a few that are very high cost, but when you look at the IQVIA data, what you recognize is that the larger proportion of them are actually around 50,000 and less. Only 23% are between 50 and 200,000, and only a very small percentage are in that very high, range between 200,000 and $1 million. So, okay, next slide. I think I got a lot of slides in this section. So this is the estimated patient population versus cost for orphan drugs. This is very clear. Well, sort of clear if you look at all the garbage that's there. What you've got is on the y-axis is the estimated annual cost of the drugs, and you got on the x-axis the number of patients. And in fact, the estimated patients in the thousands, right? So the fewer the patients you've got, the more likely it is that that drug is going to actually cost a lot. The more patients you've got, the more likely it is they're not going to cost that much. And you can see it by the disease groups as well. Next slide there. I want to give people a chance to talk, not hog it up. This is the orphan drug counts and sales by annual per patient cost. This is the US data. We couldn't find any Canadian data, but it's a fairly decent surrogate. This again says the same thing, right? Out of 374 orphan drugs, if we look at it from terms of number of drugs, or if we look at it in terms of sales, again, that high end is a tiny little sliver compared to the bulk of these drugs, which are somewhere between 50 or between 50 and 100,000. So again, it really belies the fact that we've got many of these drugs that are coming in as hugely expensive drugs on a per drug basis. Next slide, please. I like this. It was just a precision medicine market. It's poised to grow by 11.5% by 2027. I don't know why there's 2 2s in there. I just copied it straight out. So it wasn't my typo, it was their typo. But so this is exactly, next slide. This is exactly what we got in terms of the estimates on the worldwide orphan drug sales and prescription market from that 2016 to 24. It's about 12%. So we've got pretty much, the whole idea is that we're getting more and more of these targeted therapies, and we're going to continue to get them, and they're growing at an exponential rate because this is the next wave of therapies. These are the therapies that are going to be the most important for us. We've always been doing that in the rare disease space, and now as precision medicines are coming in, we're seeing the same phenomena. So this is very important in terms of understanding, where is this growth in terms of markets? I think that's the last one. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. You can go back one, Ange. Okay. We'll leave it there. Comments? Any thoughts here? Bill, I'll start with you. Maybe you'll, no, you aren't, yeah. You start a bit.
Yeah, we're getting some great discussion in the chat group,
okay.
which is terrific.
Let's make some people come speak up.
Well, a couple of them want to know, why we're doing trials here in Canada for medicines, but we're not actually getting access in terms of the drugs actually being launched. So I want to just hold that for the next poll,
yes,
if that's okay.
Yeah.
But there was an interesting comment. I think it's from the Prader-Willi group. I might be wrong, but there is a case of somebody taking a drug therapy that's over 20 years old, and it still has a premium or breakthrough price tag attached. So I don't want to necessarily, call on her to weigh in verbally, but there are other cases where there is that that negotiated multiple opportunities to come through, and then others where you are going to be facing that higher price tag. Where something I think that is jumping out for me on the numbers and the discussion from last time is a drug is not a drug. It's not a drug. Like you can't have one figure here and say that applies across all rare disease areas. And Alec McKenzie, when he joins us, he always says, why don't we repurpose old drugs? Why don't we try to get access to medicines that do cost a lot less? And the stuff that you've shown is that there is a lot of that already happening or could happen. It's not always the really high price tags that are actually saving lives and improving lives for rare diseases. But does anything else jump out for other people on the line? I know we've got some, Robert, we're not going to necessarily call on you first again, but maybe Carrie, and is Leanne joined us in terms of the clinician?
Leanne is not here. I think we've got, a number of people on here that I wouldn't mind kind of getting into the conversation. I mean, part of it is how, you know, when you reflect on this, does this make sense to you? Is this kind of, you know, or have I kind of screwed up the facts here? Or is this not facts? You know, so I almost want to call on Kate. Kate, you represent bio. You know, why don't you give us a thought here? You know, does this, and especially with regard to the precision medicines as well, what does this suggest to you? And Kate is there.
There we go.
Yes.
So, you know, the challenge here ultimately is the leadership that an awful lot of these medicines is bringing into the healthcare system has got a value equation over the longer term as we see the technology evolving and changing into more personalized, more specialized medicines. So, you know, whatever we end up seeing in terms of a policy framework or, you know, people's perceptions around the work that the federal government's committed to now is going to set a path forward for the next generation of specialized medicines coming forth. So that brings with it a whole system of learning. It brings patient expertise into play, which is vital to decision-making ultimately through the entire process. It brings clinical expertise into the process. And those are things that are not attributed with any kind of financial value, which to me is a tragedy. You know, I think somebody said it earlier in the chat room around the cost and expense to a family dealing with these issues directly versus a family who doesn't get access to something. You know, it's a very difficult mathematical equation. And I know that from our work, we're really looking at this through the lens of, let's make sure we do the right thing now to be able to open up and ensure that we've got a longer term trajectory for these medicines going forward.
Great, huge point. I mean, as we looked at in terms of the precision medicines, right? What we're doing in rare diseases is going to actually be the same challenges or maybe the same solutions that some of these precision medicines are going to be having. And we really do need to also lay out some of the pathways. What are the mechanisms, right? Other people. Anybody else have a reflection?
I've never known Dennis Morris to be so quiet. I know you're going to be in the chat room if you're not actually going to unmute yourself, Dennis, but you usually have a good perspective on these things. So in the chat room, if we want to throw over there, because I think there's been some good discussion, and thanks, Fred, for weighing in on there regarding the extended premium prices. We need better answers and maybe from provincial payers, right? So this is an example when presented to ministers or senior officials that creates bias and distrust that might taint, to Kate's point, some of those goodwill, future-oriented discussions. And I think that's actually the purpose of this webinar. It's getting the foundation and the facts right. And I think what you said, Durhan, earlier is, you know, these numbers and these graphs might not tell the whole story. So you're crowdsourcing here to say, look, let's get this out here. But you do track all kinds of papers. Like one that we've traded on came out, I think, definitely from the UK, and it showed that the average rare disease drug actually leads to more quality adjusted life years than the average common drug, but significant, maybe threefold. At the same time, it does carry a higher price tag. But those are the kinds of discussions we have to have, and there's lots of reasons behind it. But let's have them, and kudos to Cord and others for actually, you know, saying let's have it out.
Yeah, and we may come back to that comment, right, Bill? And that is, can we use a common denominator? Can we use a cost per quality adjusted life year for a rare disease drug, for precision medicine that would be the same as we would use for an older common drug or for a a drug that's been around. I mean, the comment here about a drug that's 20 years old, how come I'm paying the same price? I mean, those are important questions, and we don't know the answer in terms of exactly that drug. Sometimes, as you know, in order to get a drug approved for a rare indication, the company has to go back and do more clinical trials, and they have to resubmit. Now, that to me is a failure in terms of our bureaucracy, quite frankly, as opposed to, something that is, tied to the actual drug. Do we need to do that? Under what circumstances can we actually just make that extrapolation and be able to provide that expanded indication without saying, okay, you have to go back and you have to reprove the drug for this, particular population. And that adds then the additional cost in terms of both the trials, the regulatory, and the HTA to get back into it. So it's an important question when we start to think about some of these drugs. When we say repurposing, yes. Okay.
So do you want to go on to the next poll, Durhan?
Yeah, let's, I think the question is, can people unmute themselves? Hopefully they can. And if they can't, can we make sure that everybody can unmute themselves? Maybe we're not getting people that are quite able to unmute themselves so that we can let people.
They're capable of unmuting.
Okay, great. Okay, let's go to the next one. Let's take a quick look. Okay, which of the following statements is true? Now into the truth again about the availability of rare disease drugs in Canada. 80% of orphan drugs are approved in the EU or the USA are available in Canada within 2 years. We know we're lagged, but within 2 years, we get 80% of those. Number two, half of rare disease drugs funded in the top 6 countries are reimbursed in Canada. So we get 50% of what the top 6 countries are actually already providing. Half of new drug approvals in the US in 1919 to 20 were approved in Canada by 2020. So again, we're lagging the US maybe by about a year or 2 years. Most Canadians with private drug plans can access most approved rare disease drugs. Which one of these statements is true? And only one of them is true. Well, at least from our information. We're getting 80% within 2 years of EU or USA. We get half of the top 6 EU countries. So we're only getting half of what the best countries in the EU are getting. Or we're getting half that were approved in those last years in the US are also approved in Canada. Most Canadians with private drug plans can access most approved drugs. So if you have a private drug plan, if the drug is approved in Canada, you can get access. Which one of these is true? Okay, I guess we're about close to it. So we'll end the poll and share the results here. So most people said, only about half, I didn't put the word only in there. If I had, you might have gotten it. Half of rare disease drugs funded in the top 6 countries in the EU are reimbursed in Canada. We get about half of what the best funded countries are doing. So let's take a look at the slides and see what, at the data. Let's see what they say. Okay. Whoops, back up. There we go. The rate of reimbursement in Canada. So we see Canada here, and the Ontario is the surrogate for all of Canada, only because Ontario was actually the very best in Canada, so everybody else will be worse. This comes out of the Office for Health Economics in the EU. So you can see Germany, where they're reimbursing 91% of all orphan medicinal medicines. You get a big jump down between France, the Netherlands, Italy, which are all in the 60s, and Portugal, who is just about the 60s, and you get Ontario, which is 36.2. So yeah, about half of what the best 6 countries are doing is kind of what Canada is providing in terms of reimbursement for orphan medicinal medicines in the very best province. Most of the other provinces are actually doing much worse than that. And if you look at the scale, at the chart, one of my favorite peeves is that we're doing only a little bit better in, Slovenia. Norway here is a bit of an outlier, only because Norway makes their drugs available in a very different base. They do not have a formulary. So there's a caveat really in there to say, don't look at Norway. It's not going to tell you kind of really what's available. Okay, so next slide here, or is this just one here, Ange?
Durhan, in that way, Norway is like British Columbia here in Canada. It might be reimbursed, it might not. They won't tell you, apply,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, it's on a drug by drug, patient by patient basis. So yeah, we can't really use it. Okay, so this is again sort of just a chart that reinforces that. If you look across the provinces, if you look at, number of orphan medicinal medicines with a decision on use, 92 out of 125 that Health Canada authorizes, or 124. This would equate to, we get a decision on 92 of them from Health Canada. Health Canada authorizes 74% of them. If you look then at the number that are reimbursed, again, this reinforces what we've been saying before. 36% of what the EU has done, but also only, and yes, 62% of what Health Canada has authorized, but this is a far cry from what is actually being made available in Europe. Is that should be it, right, Ange, on this set? Oh, no, this is my slide. Don't look at it in terms of trying to do detail. What I just wanted to show is that that was a slide on 2019 to 2020. Out of the drugs that were approved, in the US, 2019, 2020, what you see is that 26 of them had a Health Canada submission, 45% did not. And I want to be really clear here. When we say they're not approved by Health Canada, it's not really Health Canada's fault in many respects, right? Health Canada can only approve what's submitted. So in many cases, we don't get the drugs even submitted to us. So this is a huge challenge, and we certainly don't get them submitted in a timely fashion. So this is the case. So over those 2-year periods, we've only gotten 26, approved out of that 72, 73 that are actually the full package. So this is, if we're wondering why, our patients are not doing as well as others, this kind of gives you that snapshot of it. Is there another one?
Durhan, I just want to add one more thing to that graph that you showed, the table. That shows Health Canada approvals. Just because it's approved by Health Canada doesn't mean it's actually sold or marketed. And so there are many medicines that make it through Health Canada in record time through Project Orbis or other, joint reviews. And then what we have to do with these, and we started to do that for Accord and looking into the numbers, which ones have actually moved into marketed or actually sold. And then we're going to see that, there's another quarter of the drugs, even with the green yes, that are simply not available, even if they get through Health Canada.
Yeah. So maybe, can I get somebody to either weigh in to provide a feedback on it? Is this surprising to you? Is this kind of what you expected? What does that mean for you as a patient?
And we've got some great chatter again on the side. That said, there are some folks on the line who are not normally wallflowers, but I do appreciate you weighing in the chat group. And maybe, I'll call Barry Katzoff out, because you talked about the Helsinki Accord that requires that if a patient gets access and clinical advantage on a clinical trial, then the manufacturer has an ethical obligation to continue to provide that drug until a funder, public or private, is found. So that's an obligation that I think that the drug developers take pretty seriously. I'd actually love to hear from one of them. Some of them are providing free access for the long term if folks are getting on clinical trials, and it might never come to Canada. But thanks, Barry, for weighing in on that question.
Any other comments here? Yes. Anybody would like to weigh in on a comment here? Reflections on what you're seeing here. Is it surprising to you that we're only at half of what the EU has in the top countries? Is that acceptable? Are we okay with that?
Yeah, well, it's funny. Some of the stuff coming out of the PMPRB over the last couple of days in terms of the new meds entry watch. The fact that people pull out of that is Canada spending 19% more than the median, right? Or we're getting access to most of the really high selling drugs globally. So we should be celebrating that. And there's one fact that says that Canada is getting access to 87% of the global market leaders in drugs, which is interesting. But then what happens to the 13%? And I would put a lot of money on the fact that those 13% of drugs, let's say there are 10 or 12 a year, most of them are orphan drugs. So coming out with stats and celebrating things like that, I think could be argued as discriminatory against Canadians with rare diseases. Of course, they're not going to be the top selling drugs globally in many cases, as we've talked about before. But don't be waving a flag and saying that that's something to celebrate.
Okay, so let's do the next question here. Next poll. Okay, which of these rare drug pricing solutions supports innovation, access, and sustainable budgets? This is not a fact question so much as it is an opinion question. What could we do? What could we do? We could increase the ICER from 50,000 per quality for common drugs to 200,000 per quality for an innovative drug. So that would help us to be able to get drugs in, but also assure that we get access to sustainability. We can set a maximum profit for the rare disease drugs. And if a company's revenues exceed what that maximum profit is, then they have to give a rebate. We can offer incentives for rare research and development. We can reduce the fees and the time to approval. And we can support then those managed access risk-sharing agreements. I think Robin has mentioned it. And finally, we could start access through the private plans. We can negotiate province by province for the public access. Which one of these would you feel, and it's an opinion question, not a fact question in this case, is the best solution for being able to assure that we can get innovation support, access, and sustainable budgets? What would you vote for? Okay, most people kind of locked in. Okay, so we'll end the poll. Let's take a look. All right, so most people say offer the incentives for R&D, reduce the fees and time to approval, and then also to support risk-sharing managed access. Most of you will know is that what we've got in number one is kind of what we do now, a little bit, right? And this is certainly what many countries do, is that they give a differential cost per quality for the rare disease drug. UK is one of the few countries that actually does that maximum profit, and if you exceed it, especially for the ultra, they make you give some of the money back. And then the last one, start the access through private plans. This is actually what we do today, right? This is today's solution. It's obviously not a workable solution. So I'm glad that most people said, nah, I don't think we should be going there. So support, offer incentives for R&D. This is somewhat of the essence of what's in that high cost for rare disease drug strategy. So, let's think about it. Let's figure out, we don't offer incentives for R&D though, but it is inserted into the consultation. So if you're in the consultations, really talk about it. What do we need to do? Because we backed out of an orphan drug regulatory framework, and we did not follow what the US or the EU was going to say. We don't need an incentive for R&D. We'll just just let it be. In the US, they offered, support for clinical trials. They offered extended patents, and they also offered periods of exclusivity. And then, of course, by supporting risk sharing, we can bring in those drugs at a much quicker basis without a full set of highly certain data. Okay, let's do the last one, Ange. We'll do it quickly. As I said, that was an opinion question more than it was a factual question. The last one, last poll there. Okay. Which of the following is true about the time to reimbursement for rare disease drugs in Canada? For 2001 to 2019, that 18-year period, the average time to reimburse in Ontario was less than 2 years. The province with the most reimbursed rare disease drugs has the shortest time to reimbursement. So the more drugs that you've made available, the shorter your time to reimbursement. Since the PCPA, the time from CADA's recommendation to reimbursement is the same across all provinces. One of the things that PCPA did was to actually, even out the time it gets to access. The last one says, compared to EU, Canada ranks above only Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, and Portugal in timeliness to access. We're only doing better than some of these very poor countries. Which one of these is true? under 2 years in Ontario. Most reimbursed rare disease drug has the shortest time. Since the PCPA, we kind of even out the time across provinces. And the last one says, we're kind of only doing better than some of the worst performing countries in the EU. Okay, we'll end the poll. Okay, most people said, you know what, we're only ranking slightly above Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, and Portugal in timeliness to access. Not many people felt that we have been able to even out the time across the country. And the shortest time to reimbursement is not necessarily where you've got the most reimbursement. So let's just do a couple quick slides there, Ange. Okay, so this is it. Your average time to reimbursement in Ontario, it's about 786 days. Your average time is in Poland is 1800. Your best time is in Germany, which is 21 days. And then the others are slightly above that, you know, slightly over a year or so. So there's where we see, you know, Ontario, which is the best performing province in terms of ranking. Do I have one more slide, Ange? No, okay, that was it.
That's it.
Okay, so any quick reflections on this one in terms of our time to reimbursement? What are we thinking here? Or let me open it up. Any thoughts whatsoever from people in terms of, you know, what is the, you know, the idea was to give you a bit of a landscape. Where are we in Canada with regard to, you know, approvals, access, and time to reimbursement? How are we doing? Because this is what we're trying to build for, right? In terms of looking at a rare disease drug strategy. This is, you know, what we want to build from. Any thoughts?
We've got one suggestion from the chat group. I don't know if you want me to summarize that, Durham?
Sure.
Yeah, and thanks, Judith, for this. Having a session that looks at the issues that need to be addressed, the arguments and data to bring forward to address those issues, and then get feedback from participants, whether the issues are right and whether the right arguments are missing something. I think that's a great point. I think that this session was an opportunity to sort of test the community in terms of their general knowledge level around some of the key data points that are underpinning Health Canada's arguments for moving forward in the way that they are. And so actually, I think a lot of that is already out there. But your point is very well taken. This is not the last opportunity, I don't think, and Durhan, correct me if I'm wrong, to take the feedback from this session and the general knowledge levels, et cetera, to inform, you know, the base level build that that Durhan Accord is undertaking on this. So it might seem you know, like we're bouncing around, but I you know, each one of these fact points are talking about, you know, clinical effectiveness. What do you think, you know, the ICER, time to reimbursement and all of that, and getting Canadians generally on the same page with really where are we in reality today, and then where do we want to go in terms of the rare disease strategy. So
Yeah, I'm going to ask two things really quickly for feedback. For anybody who's been in the town halls or the stakeholder meetings, or just reading the discussion guide, you know, do you feel that if in fact we were to answer those questions in the way they're presented, that they would actually solve the kind of issues that we're talking about here, getting more drugs into Canada on a more timely basis, and being able to provide the value proposition to these therapies as opposed to angsting over what is, from what we can tell, certainly not a true fact around what the budget impact is. I see Maureen came in. Maureen, can we bounce this to you? I know you only came in, but I'm sure you're good for giving us a short bit of feedback based on what you saw in the discussion guide, based on what you know, are we going to get there? We're going to be able to, you know, to answer these issues around the number, the timeliness, and the writing of the cost impacts.
Mr. Hahn, I haven't had a really good look at discussion guides, so I'm a little bit embarrassed to say that. I've been working on some other stuff this week, so I haven't taken a really close look at it. So I'm not sure about that, but going to a previous question that you had before, what do we have in Canada? I think what we have is a very strong rare disease community that's really united. We're a small country, so our community knows each other. I think we've got top world-renowned researchers, and we've got all these things that should bring us to the top. We don't have the infrastructure that's working for us, and that's the big problem. And I think for patients, the whole postal code lottery is a huge issue. That it's not a Canadian value that someone in New Brunswick doesn't have access to a drug that someone in Manitoba has. So I haven't looked at the guide, so I'm sorry. I have to look at it more closely. And I'm only my town hall is on March 3rd, so I haven't. That's why I've been able to push it back a little bit. But so I'll leave it at that and let somebody who's studied the guide answer better.
Well, I'm going to pounce it then to one other person who's always good for an answer as well. Joan Paulin. I know you've had the opportunity because you and I have been in some of the same sessions.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Yeah, I'm just writing a really long thing in the chat room. I think my thought is that the PMPRB, CADTH, and Health Canada are the answers or the information that they provide to us on our ability to access drugs is woefully wrong, and that their focus is directed more again on the cost of the drug, of rare disease drugs to the system, rather than on the value of the drug to the patient and to the complete community. And I think as a rare group organization, I think we need to figure out how we direct focus and lay out the arguments to focusing less on cost and more on value to patients and society of rare disease drugs. I'm not sure how we do that. I think that's what our rare disease strategy needs to do somehow. But yeah, we're the numbers of the information we get from the powers that be I think are misrepresentative of the actual state of the rare disease community.
Brilliant. So thank you so very much. I think we need to all be very vigilant, as Maureen is saying, in terms of responding to the discussion guide or to participating in the town halls. I urge all of you to do that. We wanted to, in this case, just bring you some of the facts that, we feel may be somewhat misrepresented, as Joan says, in terms of the premise for not only the discussion guide, but how we want to change the drug system in Canada. And it's very important that we recognize rare disease drugs are not runaway costs. That even if we funded everything, it's not going to punch a hole in terms of healthcare, in terms of the drug budgets. That right now we are far below other countries in terms of both the number of drugs and the timeliness to access. So this is doing a huge disservice to our rare disease patients. And I really urge people to take a look at, what do we need to do in this rare disease drug strategy to make sure that we can write those, as well as some of the issues that are raised there. Yes, consistency. Yes, ensuring sustainability is there. And yes, assuring that we're going to have drugs that are going to be evidence-based. But hey, that ain't the whole answer. And even if we answered all those, we still are going to have huge, huge issues in terms of getting drugs. Bill, I'll leave it to you.
Well, I think that was a great way to wrap it up. Again, looking over to the chat group, there's a lot of very appreciative participants and delegates. So we'll see you in a couple of weeks for the next session. And also tip a hat to those of you who have said cost and affordability is a real challenge for you. This is something that is a challenge for everyone. I think the main point is, there's some brains around this table. We need to get them around Health Canada's table too, to figure it out. And there are some solutions out there. And honestly, Durhan, in previous webinars recently, it's been, Germany does this, France does that. It's proven that there are systems to make this work. And gosh, if we can stay warm in minus 15-degree weather as Canadians, we can figure this out, right? So Again, I'm sitting in Ottawa. Thanks very much.
Thanks a
everybody.
lot, folks. We appreciate it. We'll see you. And 2 weeks from now is actually Rare Disease Day celebration. So we're going to talk about the drugs at the rare disease strategy and the achievements we've been able to make and how those are helping us to get the best possible support for a rare disease drug program. Okay, thanks a lot, folks. Thanks again, Bill, and everybody who responded.